This episode may contain language or discussions that may be offensive or triggering. Refer to the episode summary for details. And welcome to the SheConfidential podcast. And my name is Charlene Ketchum. And today I'm chatting with Miss Amanda Bennett. She's a PhD candidate at Duke University and also the founder of Define and Empower Collective. And today we are going to chat about what it means to be a Black feminist in today's world. We're going to explore the role of art and healing and self-expression and exploration. And we're going to talk a lot about Define and Empower's mission, services, and programs, and let you know how you can support them and collaborate with them as well. So, Amanda, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk more about this.
Yes, absolutely. So, what the audience may not know is I got to chat with Amanda for the Define and Empower podcast as well. And where can they listen to that podcast?
Yeah, the podcast is called Black Feminist Hotline. You can find it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify under the name Black Feminist Hotline.
Okay, perfect. And I will have a link, y'all, for that podcast in the description box as well so that you can support the Black Feminist podcast as well. And so we got to meet and chat a few weeks ago, and Amanda's just like amazing. And so we had like such a good connection. I was like, oh, she come back and talk. We got to talk some more about everything that she does. And so we're just gonna dive right in, just talking about being a Black feminist, because I think being a feminist can get a bad rap. A lot of people are hesitant to say I'm a feminist. And first, let's start with defining what is a feminist.
To me, a feminist is a woman or non-binary person, or really anybody who believes in breaking cycles of intergenerational trauma and using their inner capacities to foster community, solidarity, hope within, the communities that they're living in. And we can do that through reading the works of feminist writers like Audre Lorde, Toni Morrison, but we can also do it by listening to stories from our grandmothers and mothers and really interpreting what choices did they make based upon the situations that they were in, and how do we alter our lives based upon that knowledge that's inherited.
That sounds incredibly empowering. And I don't think I've heard the definition framed that way before. It sounds a lot more inviting and also really essential, like to our survival. The way you just frame that, particularly listening to those stories of the women who came before us, that's essential.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm a millennial for context. And for a long time, it was hard for me to want to listen to those stories because you have the kind of idea of, I'm going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, they're toxic, etc. But we have to think about the ways that things like racism and white supremacy and, sexism have shaped the psychological states and emotional states of Black folks that came before us. And the fact that they were able to make a life that resulted in our existence now is really commendable. So how do we not enable toxic behavior, but try and be interested observers of their stories and compassionate observers too?
Absolutely. And we can't stop those. We can't really respond to behaviors and mindsets that we don't first understand. And it's such a blessing that we have the choice and the privilege, because let's call it what it is. We have a privilege that we even get to openly have these conversations, because back in the era of our grandmothers and great grandmothers in particular, they didn't have autonomy over their bodies. And if they did have those conversations, they were with women. And that's where that whole phrase, quiet as it's kept, came from. Those were the things you did not talk about. And we still have that to a degree today. And that's kind of where the name SheConfidential comes from. Like all those things that we as women have been conditioned not to openly discuss, things that we can't even acknowledge to ourselves because of all that conditioning. And so that's that first step. And we are a generation, I think I'm Gen X. So we are the first generations really to be able to say, you know what, we're going to question and discuss everything openly.
Yes. And like raising those questions and having those discussions is actually a political issue, because in many ways, the shame that we internalize as Black women in a racist and sexist society keeps us in toxic relationships, keeps us in toxic jobs, keeps us having, disordered eating patterns, bad financial situations, and etc. Like I could go on and on. And so many of our problems as Black women today are a product of these generations of silence and refusing to talk about what has happened to us and has affected us.
Yeah. And so, with knowing that, why do you think so many are reluctant to call themselves a feminist?
Mm. I think that there's a lack of knowledge of the ways in which we can incorporate feminism into our everyday lives because, the iconic images of feminism of, Gloria Steinem, skinny white woman out there in the streets, or, Angela Davis, like literally going to jail, being on a
Yeah.
wanted poster. And of course, I'm grateful for their sacrifice and the work that they did. But feminism also happens in the moments of, hanging out in your grandma's kitchen and you're learning how to make neck bones from her, or
Mhm.
listening to your mother talk about her childhood experiences growing up, or even coming to mentor women who are younger than you and realizing, hey, I have the power to stop violence in this moment. I'm going to nurture people who I see a lot of myself in. I mean, it's really practical measures that people could actually easily incorporate into their daily lives.
Yes. Yes. And I so appreciate that you make it so, I mean, you make it sound so simple. We know the work isn't simple, but it is, because people often think that is the picture, that you have to be out there going to jail, like
Hmm.
down for the cause, hardcore, like angry all the time to
Yeah.
be a real feminist. And nah, it's a lot more basic than that.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, I'm thinking even of Audre Lorde's essay, The Uses of Anger. And it's like, for Lorde, yes, anger is an important catalyst of political progress, but you also have to have time to hold space for the sorrow. Because even for her, she was recovering from breast cancer that would eventually take her life and all kinds of other socioeconomic issues. And she had to really take time to process what had happened to her before she could be truly angry enough about it to change her situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And grief and sorrow, or anger and sorrow, are so closely related. But I think that as a society, we are more comfortable with acknowledging that anger as opposed to that sorrow. Because it's like the anger, we can lash out at that. We can scream, we can yell and rally together. And the sorrow, though, where do we fit that in? And I think that's very complicated in terms of learning how to process that and how to show that, how to be vulnerable with that for Black women in particular, because, we often say we don't have time to be sad. We have to keep it moving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for many of us, myself included, anger has been a defense mechanism because we grew up thinking, well, you can't cry because no one's going to care like they would for a little white girl. And in many ways, only feeling that anger has denied me the opportunity to fully step into other parts of myself. And in the
Mhm.
act of becoming vulnerable, feeling that sorrow, learning the story around that sorrow has been what has been able to give me the power to be an effective feminist practitioner as a teacher and a mentor and a community leader.
How did you get started on your journey?
I had a fantastic Black feminist professor when I was a freshman in college. Her name was Trudy Harris. She's still teaching and affecting people today. And she taught a class that was a survey about Black literature, but focusing on Black women authors. And through her, because she was a friend of Toni Morrison, for example, so she could talk about personal stories with all these women, and just being able to delve into the lives of these people through their writings and figure out, oh, people have felt the same way that I did 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 50 years ago, and I can have a kind of guide through what they wrote to be able to figure out how am I going to live my life as a Black woman. And I was even thinking about this the other day, the idea of being able to have so many different representations of Black women writers like Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Audre Lorde gave me comfort because I realized, oh, I can be part of a community that actually loves me because of my differences, not
Yes.
instead of having to assimilate into similarity.
Hmm. Which is such, oh my goodness, assimilation can be such a burden. And I think it's
Mhm.
been so heavy, for generations past. What I love about, and in general, I dislike the conversations about like millennials and X's and boomers, because I'm like, I think it creates more divisiveness. But there are also times when it's real and it's applicable. Because the thing that I admire the most about millennials is that most they're like, I'm gonna be who I'm gonna be. I'm not trying to fit in. I'm not trying to make you comfortable. They're the definition of I'm gonna do me. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of scared sometimes. I'm like, oh Lord, this is a lot. But and it feels like it's happening fast, but
Mhm.
it feels that way because it's uncomfortable. But really, this should have happened a long time ago,
Mhm.
because we have so many people who are successfully unhappy,
Mhm.
successfully unhealthy, successfully miserable, and they're successfully silently suffering because we were trying to assimilate, especially for Black people, because
Mhm.
Black people in America, because we had so much of our history where we weren't allowed to be in certain spaces. We weren't allowed to just be. And when we
Mhm.
got that opportunity to integrate and go to schools with whites and live in neighborhoods with whites and everything, it's like that. What was the price of that? That meant we had to fully assimilate for safety reasons. And also, that was also the benchmark of worthiness and value. And that was kind of the beginning of losing sense of self and the beginning of losing individuality. And that trickled down to our kids because one of the first things that we'll say is burden on people, and this is what millennials tend to push back on, which I think is so awesome but also scary. Those, people will say, your parents did this, this, and this, and so you have this obligation to live in a certain way because people gave you these opportunities.
Mhm.
And no, that's not fair and that's not accurate. Everyone has their
Yeah.
own life that they get to chart. I don't have to fit in with y'all and make y'all comfortable. But that's what so many of us have been conditioned to do that. And that's the danger of assimilation because it's that group think and that conditioning that tells people that you must make choices that are for the comfort and benefit of others and not yourself. And now we have this amazing generation of people filled with light who are saying, deuces, I'm going to do me.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that I have an obligation actually to be myself because of the sacrifices, because that then gives me the privilege and the luxury
Yeah.
to be able to teach them about how to be themselves as well through the way that I live my life. I mean, I've been able to teach my family about therapy, grief, emotional
Mhm.
processing, intergenerational trauma because I've had to break away in various ways and establish my identity as an individual. And it certainly was not easy at first by any means,
Mhm.
but that gradual process of saying, this is who I am, I'm not changing, what I was able to accrue respect with them to be able to see that this is actually a legitimate way of living that is possible and
Mhm.
can provide much more fulfillment than just living in quiet assimilation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to gift your loved ones something they never knew was possible.
Mhm. Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, it's just
Yeah.
that peace because for so many people, just it's like that rabbit wheel and you're on it and you have no idea that you don't even know what peace really means. For a
Mhm.
lot of people, peace is that I'm not going to be harassed by the police or that I make it home alive. And but there's more to life than that. And being given the privilege and the freedom to really examine, what does happiness look like for you? What does it feel like? If you're eating, we talk about food, what does it taste like? Like, what does it smell like? What is happiness for you? And so many people have never been asked that question or told that these are some resources that can help you define that and claim that. And that's what you, in breaking that cycle, you and so many other people, that's what you're giving. You're giving that gift to your family that they can finally get to choose. Somebody's telling them you get to choose, and these are your options, and these are your resources.
Yeah, yeah. I really appreciate you saying that. And I mean, it seems like what you're describing is the feeling of being present or grounded. And I mean, for many Black folk, myself included, we've historically not had the luxury to be able to be present in our bodies because we've had to, either dissociate or just kind of go into autopilot mode to be able to get through a day on the plantation or a day on the
Mhm.
chain gang or a day in Jim Crow South or a day, at the law office or the business office or whatever. And
Hmm.
it's like, how do we reclaim our humanity and our right to feel emotions as a political act? It is a political choice, which is why Black feminism in that way is so important. Of being able to read a text by Toni Morrison or Alice Walker is a way to get back into your body and to be present and to relive those traumatic experiences in a way that is actually not going to hurt you again.
Yes. And how do people navigate that without getting caught and lost in the pain of it?
Mm. I think a lot about Toni Morrison's essay, The Dancing Mind, where she
Mhm.
talks about peace. And she's like, peace is the intimate dance of one open mind with an equally open mind. So, and that typically happens for her in the area of reading and writing. But I'm thinking of how do we go deep into our feelings by reading books but then be able to come out of that deep water by
Mhm.
talking about that experience with people who are in our community, which is also what my work about developing a vocabulary of feeling is about, by saying, hey, as Black women, we all have very different experiences,
Yeah.
but how do we develop a common language to be able to say, here's what happened to me, can you hold this for a while? And to be able to trust that someone can reliably hold that for you. Because for so long, many of us have not had that privilege.
Mhm.
And like feminism is about being able to create that space of safety for Black women who truly deserve it.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. It's a sisterhood and essential connectedness. It makes me think of, and I don't know why this pops into my head, and I feel like we talked about this when we chatted, but we may not have. I may have had this conversation in my head with you. No. Um, but it makes me think of, there's a show, and I'm not going to say what show it is because I don't want to ruin it if somebody's still binge watching it. But there's a scene where someone gives birth, and all of the close women, and it's a show with a predominantly black cast, and she gives birth, and a lot of the women close in her life come. It's at in-home birth, and they come to help her deliver the baby, and it's all the circumstances around her pregnancy were very traumatic, and she's planning to give the baby up for adoption, so just even delivering this baby in such a personal, intimate way is traumatic. But she's got all
Mhm.
these black women around her who are encouraging her as she labors, and I thought to myself, like, wow, this is what we do. Like, this is a show depicting this, but this is literally what we do, because
Mhm.
as black women, we are designed to really be there and help each other as we nurture through those rough patches. And we all need that. When someone's in deep pain and it's like, you know what, I don't think I can do this, I can't carry this, I can't push this, I can't do this, that's when your sister's there to say, you got this, I'm right here, yes you can. You've got your other sister who's over here praying for you. You've got your other sister over here who's lighting the candles for you. You've got the other one that's just putting the cold compress on your forehead. Like, that's what we do. And I think that it's so difficult for a lot of women, one, to be able to say, I need that. Like, I need y'all in this way. It's one thing to say, let's have a girls' night and go have drinks and talk
Yeah.
about our partners, talk about fashion, and okay, we can do that. But can we say, I'm in pain? I'm laboring over something over here and I'm struggling and I need you all. And can the other women be equipped to know how to show up for you? And that's a challenge that so many of us find, being able to be vulnerable and find those spaces where we can trust ourselves and the people around us to be vulnerable in.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I think that because of tropes like the mammy figure, for example, that right to become a healer has been taken away from us to where we feel ashamed of, I am giving to everybody else. All I have now is stuff for myself. I can't give anything to you. But a method of Black feminist practice is to have this awakening through literature, whatever medium you choose, and then to be able to train yourself as a healer, such as, a doula, a teacher, a facilitator, etc., and then be able to rise to the occasion in that way. And in that moment, you're taking back the power of your own healing potential and putting it where it belongs, which is with our community of sisters, and not just giving it to people who have no respect for your boundaries or emotional needs.
Yeah, that's so empowering. And I mean, it's immensely empowering and beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's just how we can transform it to art as well.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, completely. I just think a lot about Ntozake Shange because she wrote the choreo poem for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. And
Mhm.
for context, Shange struggled with mental health issues. She attempted suicide 4 times. And it was actually through the act of running away to California and finding a community of Black and Brown women who were her sisters and helped her actually produce the play and became the source material for the women in the rainbow in the play, that she was able to truly liberate herself. And it just, I think that artistic work emphasizes that this work of healing can never happen in isolation.
Mhm. Wow, I did not know that backstory on her.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I mean, we never talk about it because Black women aren't supposed to have mental health issues or try and commit suicide. But she has been so open about that for years, and it's like if we are willing to look at Black women in that light, we can actually see a treasure trove of knowledge and wisdom that we can take on for our own purposes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's wow. and just knowing that we can help each other heal.
Mhm.
We really can. And there's just, wow, okay, now I did not know that. That is
Yeah.
huge. You know,
Yeah.
because you think about, there are so many women who are out there suffering right now. And we all have our days and our moments when it's like, oh, I feel so alone, or I feel so overwhelmed because life
Mhm.
be life. And this is, especially these days.
Yeah.
And it gets heavy. But just knowing that
Mhm.
someone else has had very dark moments, especially 4 suicide attempts, and
Mhm.
she was able to find her tribe,
Mhm.
and they were able to help encourage her through her healing, because healing looks different for everyone. We talk a lot
Mhm.
about therapy. I'm a supporter of therapy, but therapy, how we define therapy can be a lot of things. Therapy may not be actually sitting down with a licensed counselor or clinician to help you talk through and process something. Your therapy could be your art. Anything
Mhm.
that's helping you heal, meaningfully heal, could be your therapy. And you can do a combination of things at any given time. And that's what I like and is attractive to me when we start talking about like art and processing our emotions, because also a lot of therapists will incorporate art in their therapy practice because we know
Yeah.
the power of art as healing.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's also why I incorporate art into a lot of my pedagogical practices as a teacher.
Mhm.
I'll have them do creative writing prompts, and for the final projects, I'll say, do whatever medium you want that's creative that reflects the themes of our course. So our
Mhm.
class on Black women writers, they produced poetry, entire
Mhm.
albums that they recorded and wrote themselves, interviews, spell books, paintings, photographs, and they used that medium to be able to figure out, who am I now at 21 and who do I want to be going forward, and how can I respectfully draw on these Black feminist traditions to be able to make an impact in my, community and the world. And
Mhm.
even for me, I've been a writer basically my whole life, and I've written, fiction, poetry, essays, and it's like I was always using art as a way to say the things that I couldn't say out loud.
Mhm.
And, that kind of like desperate hoping for one day there will be an audience for this, kind of like Sean Jay, of, nobody knew what a choreo poem was before she invented it.
Yeah.
But it's become this seminal text that resonates with so many Black women. And it was because
Mhm.
of her need to innovate, to be able to express herself and to ensure herself that no, I'm not crazy, I'm not broken, I'm just
Mhm.
an artist and a healer.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are such an amazing educator, because I appreciate that you are, again, not pushing this expectation that everyone should process and learn the same way. I was listening to something, might have been a podcast or something, where they were saying, why do teachers make everyone write an essay? Maybe they don't want to write the essay. Maybe they should instead get to write a song or write a short
Mhm.
story or write a poem. Everyone is going to gather that information and process it in a different way. And why don't we encourage people finding their way? And I appreciate that as an educator that you're embracing that, because you're teaching people how to check in with themselves. That's something we don't know how to do. How to do those check-ins. As kids, we do, because children are so creative and so abundantly open, and they explore and they're curious. But then we go to school, and all that is that is educated out of you. You learn
Mhm.
to do things this way, and this is the process. And any other way, you need to save those creative endeavors for special times.
Mhm.
And that's not the best way for a lot of people, maybe even most.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I completely agree. And I mean, in that way, I think that teaching is a way to intervene in cycles of intergenerational trauma because, we had these figures of the abuser and the et cetera, but in many ways, the abused are people who become abusers. And so through teaching with people who are 18 to 22 years old,
Mhm.
you're able to intervene and say, hey, what has
Mhm.
happened to you? How do you process it? Such that you don't begin to project that out into the world and every interaction that you have.
Right.
Or when you have someone who's in your care as like a mentee or a younger employee, you don't have to crush them because they
Right.
remind you of yourself or shut down because
Mhm.
they remind you of yourself.
Yeah.
Because what you don't process, you will become ashamed of.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is something that you help people discover that pathway through define and empower. You do a lot of the work in that as well. And so, can you describe a little bit, like what was the inspiration for starting Define and Empower, and what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for asking. I actually founded it this year with a friend from my PhD program, and I really founded it in the wake of the passing of one of my friends from my PhD program who died by suicide, actually.
Mhm.
And I just had this moment of awakening of, wow, this entire academic environment is actually deeply toxic and abusive, although we claim to be the practitioners and stewards of all of this gender, race, and sexuality knowledge. And so, Define and Empower is an offshoot of academic Black feminism in that we do consulting, training, workshops, and research that are all centered in Black feminist thought that is designed to cater to Black women's needs. So we can come into your workplace, your school, your university, and offer a workshop or a training that educates you about how to take account of Black women's emotional needs so that they are not under extreme psychological stress.
Mhm.
And really just being able to stage conversations about how do we begin to reshape our society in a way that addresses our intergenerational trauma and also the extra burdens that we place upon Black women to take responsibility for our collective traumas. But that's not happening anymore.
Yeah. No, it's not.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's such essential work. Such essential work.
thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And we also have like an Instagram and a TikTok and a podcast. And I'm able to work with my students to be able to create content for this platform. So I'm basically teaching people how to inhabit Black feminist knowledge differently through the different arms of our organization.
Wonderful. I love that.
Thanks. Thanks.
And so what attracts people to come into the, because when I think, I don't know, I'm sure they had those classes when I was in undergrad, but I, I don't know, because I took a lot of sociology sort of classes, and I think they had a women's studies program, but the women's studies program didn't focus on the Black experience. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that is a more recent development, really just focusing on us. And that's
Mm-hmm.
probably what wasn't attractive to me about it, because I don't want to sit in another setting and just focus on everything about like white people. Because at that point, I think the cool thing about when you go to college is because you're exploring more about yourself. And as a Black woman, you really have all these unanswered questions about, why am I this way? Why are the
Mm-hmm.
women around me this way? Why have I been taught these different things? And why do I have these limitations? And why do we have these labels? Like, what makes this behavior, whorish, or what makes this person, a good girl? Like, how do we get those labels? Where did it all come from? And then when you realize a lot of that came from white patriarchy, you're like, ah, okay.
Yeah.
So what's
Yeah.
the other way? What are my options now? And so no
Yeah.
one was really teaching us how to dissect or analyze those things, not at least not at my school,
Yeah.
back when I was in undergrad. And so I'm really happy that that's changing now, because college is that time of life when a lot of people really are exploring their identity and trying to figure out their place in the world and their purpose and what fulfills them. And having classes like yours and programs like yours will really help empower the next generation of not just Black women, but everyone, because the more people understand how Black women are impacted and respond to that appropriately in a way that empowers and uplifts and supports Black women, the whole world will be a much better place.
Mhm, mhm. Yep, I completely agree. And yeah, like a lot of my students do come to my class because of some kind of identification, because I have a lot of intersections of identity of I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm also queer. And so I have students of all kinds of different racial backgrounds, sexual orientations, gender identities as well, and like
Mhm.
non-binary and trans as well. And, luckily I am a Black woman teaching this class. I mean, I'm the only Black person in my department. I'm one of a small handful of Black faculty at my school, certainly one of a smaller handful of Black women. So just being able to be that model of your story doesn't have to end at 25 by death as it did for my dear friend who passed away. Like, I can be a model of how do you live a fulfilling, authentic, and compassionate life that's grounded in community in a way that's also fun and accessible and loving. And so I am teaching about the literature and the text and stuff, but also I'm trying to show a model of a different kind of life that they could have if they wanted to learn from these women in the way that I have.
Absolutely. So what keeps you inspired to do this calling? I don't want to call it work. It's really your being of service. So what
Mhm.
called you to this service?
Hmm. Probably my inherent like deep idealism and optimism. And initially it was because I needed help because I struggled with, an eating disorder and depression and,
Mhm.
all kinds of just other traumatic things going on in my life.
Yeah.
And I was just so inspired by the almost magic effect of this Black feminist literature of I can go into this text, see myself represented, and literally have a map as to how to plan my life differently. And I wanted to become a kind of practitioner of that magic, almost as like a witch in that sense of
Yeah.
how do I pass down these spells and rituals to
Yes.
people who are seeking similar clarity in their lives. And
Mhm.
just that joy that I feel from my students who are, mostly women or queer folks and people of color, being able to come into themselves and create incredibly complex and innovative styles of telling their stories through fiction, music, art, painting. I it's addictive of I want to have this happen in the world as much as possible because they are helping to make the world a better place through them being
Yes.
themselves.
Yes. And storytelling from the beginning of time,
Mhm,
storytelling has played an important role in healing and just in self discovery. And just having that empowerment and permission to tell your story in the way that you feel it needs to be told.
yes, yes, yes. And like believing that I have the power to tell my story because for so
Yeah.
long I thought, oh, if I speak, nobody will care or nobody will understand me or I'm completely alone. But every time I tell my story, I realize, oh, I'm not alone and people
Yeah.
actually love me when I'm showing up as myself. That was a
Mhm.
revelation in itself for me.
Yeah. That was huge. That what you just said is huge for people to know. And for, just in case y'all didn't hear what she just said, people love me when I show up as myself.
The right people, the people who matter.
Yes.
Hmm.
And that's what you really do want to weed these other folks out. We try to make ourselves palatable for everybody, but
Yeah.
you don't really want everybody in your circle. Like, let me tell
Mm-mm.
you, you really don't.
No.
You don't. You don't want it. So be
Mm-mm.
you, and the people who will fuel you, who will help your light shine even brighter, they'll stay. Everybody else will scatter away, and that's what you
Hmm.
want. Don't water it down.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
right people will love it. They will love it and they will support it. But it's that fear, fear and all the fear that stems from all those unresolved, unacknowledged traumas that keep us on that wheel where we're just like, stay. I don't want people to leave. I need to be accepted. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be accepted, but understand your why. When your need to be accepted is infringing or blocking or impairing your joy and your peace, you gotta examine that
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's off.
And systems like patriarchy and white supremacy and all of that need us to be complacent and not want to show up as ourselves because that keeps us, as I said, in really toxic situations that limit our ability to make massive change. I mean, what if Angela Davis had worried about, will people like me? What if Toni Morrison had worried about, will people like what I have to say in my novels? We wouldn't have The Bluest Eye or Beloved or Sula. We wouldn't have
Mm-hmm.
the political movement that Angela Davis has fostered. I mean, we wouldn't be where we are today if they had been worried about conforming to what people expected from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And every day, and I want people in the audience who hear it, like, you don't have to become a best selling, world renowned author or artist to make a huge impact. Women who are saying, you know what, I am going to choose the career I want to choose, or I'm going to leave this church that is toxic because they're allowing and uplifting this pastor who's literally doing everybody under the sun in the church, and I'm not okay with that. So I'm gonna go to a
Mhm.
different church. Honey, you're making feminist type moves as well. To the woman who decides, okay, I really, really want a baby and I'm 30 years old and I'm going to have a baby, even though everyone tells me that's not what good girls do. I'm going to have this baby because that's what I want to do. That's making feminist moves.
Mhm.
To the woman who's
Yeah.
unhappy in her marriage and she's got a husband that's emotionally abusive and neglectful, and she's saying, you know what, everybody on the outside is looking at this perfect life, and I'm trying to maintain this perfect life, but you know what? This is not healthy. This is what my grandma did. This is what my grandmother's marriage was like. And people applauded them because they made it to 50 years. And I've been trying to make it to 50 years, but I am suffering and I am miserable and I have high blood pressure because this marriage is killing me. I'm not going to do it anymore. That's making feminist moves. And so everyday women can make feminist moves because, again, we're up against like so much like conditioning that we're told we're supposed to do. Makes certain choices are good, certain choices are bad, and they're not okay. And anytime you start questioning those things, you're making some feminist moves.
Yeah.
Ask your grandmother. Like, if, I've started asking women, if you had the option to do whatever you wanted to do in life, what would it have been? The heartbreaking thing is that a lot of the stories and things that they'll tell you are drastically different from their current circumstance. Now, that's not to say that they're not happy, because, and so I don't want to imply that everybody's unhappy. But what I'm saying is, for so long, women were even denied the option to fully dream or even try to pursue those dreams. And we have an obligation, as you said earlier, Amanda, we have an obligation. They didn't have that option. They didn't have that privilege to dream out loud and pursue those dreams. And we do.
Yeah. 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 Like we have the luxury to be able to have experiences where we can build trust in ourselves and therefore also build our self-esteem. And we owe that to our daughters, both biologically and also just community based of how can I possibly raise the next generation of women if I have not, pushed myself to be
Yeah.
able to know what I'm capable of? I mean, our daughters, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, are looking at us to see what
Hmm.
choices is she making? What do I want to keep? What do I want to throw away?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot. And it's all related. Like, my friends and I will lament sometimes because we see how millennials are like just living their best life from day one, and we're like, man, you know what? These people stayed at these jobs 15 years. They hated it, made no money, but they did it because our parents would have said, well, you got this degree in that field, so you need to work in that field and you need to stay at that job because you don't need to be job hopping. And so it's like people have given so much of their lives to misery because that was the status quo.
Mhm.
And we see a young generation that's saying, we're not going to do that. And we're like, wow, maybe these girls coming after us won't be sitting here lamenting lost time or trying to repair so many wounds because they didn't know that they had these luxuries of options. And that's the light at the end of the tunnel, that others can benefit from our stories, but we have to tell our stories first.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that that act of telling the story will also remove a lot of the intergenerational bitterness of, oh, those old women are boring, or, oh,
Yeah.
those young girls are just, out here doing whatever, being fast or whatever. But instead of that, being
Mhm.
able to say, hey, as an older woman, you have the maturity and experience that I desperately am seeking as a young woman.
Yes.
And to the young woman saying, hey, you have the fire and passion and, courage that I really want to learn how to embody. How can we learn from each other?
Because we absolutely can. Yeah, we absolutely can. I mean, and you know what? People better not be fooled. These seasoned ladies are very saucy. And
Yes.
because one thing I'm learning, even I said to somebody when I turned 40, I don't know if it was like something that was just like, I'm not for all this bullshit anymore. Like, I just got like really honest, and my tolerance level for a lot of
Mhm.
nonsense was like, I'm good on that. It's just like I'm gonna call it how I see it. And again, moving in compassion and grace, because we all deserve that.
Mhm.
But holding people and holding myself accountable is like super important. And I'm not going to make room for things that don't make me happy. Like, that's just unnecessary. It's like, I'm not going to choose misery. It's a choice. And I recognize that. Like, I sit in a lot of privilege in some of the options that I have, and I'm going to work them options because my great grandma didn't have those options. My grandma didn't have those options. My mom didn't have those options, but I do. So it stops here. And it's such an empowering thing to be able to say that. But I think that as you get older, you acquire a greater sense of comfort and confidence about yourself, because as women, we're taught, be so humble and be meek and this and that. And again, I am very traditional in a lot of senses. But I also understand that if I don't hype me up, if I'm not my number one hype girl, who else will be? Because the world only knows how awesome I am if I tell them and show them. That doesn't mean that I'm not saying you're awesome too, but I need to let you know, like, I am awesome. It's a lot of fire over here. And so these seasoned ladies, they have so much sauciness and they have so much wisdom to share with us, because we often talk about the suffering and the pain of those who came before us. But there's so much resilience, there's so much hope, there's so much ingenuity that
Mm-hmm.
they can really share with us if we just ask. Because on both sides, I think there's this arrogance that we did it the right way.
Yep.
We're doing it the right way. And they didn't do it the right way. Ugh, them. No, the right way is relative and subjective, because it's based on that particular person's needs and circumstances. But there's value in learning a little bit about everybody's way so that you can make it what's right for you. So just seeing that synergy between the different generations is critical, because again, we need all of us. We need all of us. The saucy seasoned ladies
Yeah.
and the young ladies who are bringing their new variety of sauciness. It all. There's
Yeah.
room for all of it. And when it all comes together, like, oh my goodness, it's amazing.
It's like gumbo.
Yes. Yes. And see, everybody can't handle it. And so that's what's scary. People are like, I don't know. Especially these people who are still brainwashed, and there are a lot of women who are still brainwashed by white patriarchy. And even for me, like, what it has done for me is I have a lot of self awareness. So I
Mm-hmm.
still have moments when I'm like, oh, okay, I see something on Instagram and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't have said that. Or, oh my gosh, she said that she put this on social media. Like, oh my God, you go, girl. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't. And what I've learned is it's perfectly okay for me to not want to present and do or say certain things. But what's not okay is for me to dismiss or downplay my sister because she chooses to move different.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is for her to understand her why. As long as she's doing it from a place of this is actually going to serve her well, and in her expression or how she feels or how she makes her money, then it is absolutely fine. But on the outside, it's not for me to question that or judge her or dismiss her for that. And so I think that that's some work that a lot of us, particularly Gen X and up, really have to work on, because we were trained and conditioned to keep a lot of ratchet things on a DL. And it's like, just live your life. Whatever you feel comfortable with is perfectly okay, but you do not get to impose that on someone else. Because
Yes. And I
at
think that self. Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that self-awareness is just a sign that you are truly living in your purpose, because so often when people are, living in misery, there's no separation between them and other people, because everyone becomes an extension of you because you don't want to have to face yourself. So you're always kind of
Mhm.
externalizing yourself onto other people. But it's like when I'm actually knowing what are my capacities, why am I here, what am I doing, there's not even
Mhm.
the impulse to judge someone. You're just like, oh, I am an observer taking this in. Interesting. I'm going to process that and then move about my day.
Yes, absolutely. And kudos to her. It's like, so one of my, before we wrap up, I'll share this. My sister knows this about me. There are certain things, certain posts I will never comment on or like or save on social media, because they tracking everything we do on there.
Yep.
But they don't know if I screenshot. At least I don't think they do. And so there, so there are definitely, because again, I everyone doesn't deserve or need access to know everything about you. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. You get to keep parts of yourself to yourself. And that has given me so much comfort in knowing how to move with things, because I think a lot of times we're so harsh with ourselves, and especially when we're evolving, and evolving doesn't necessarily mean that everything that came before that was bad. It's just, you're more enlightened about what works for you and how you need to exist in the world as a compassionate and loving human being, because that's our only requirement, to live and be a compassionate, loving human being. Sounds simple, but it's complicated. But that's our requirement. That's the price, the fee that we need to be exchanging to the earth and to whoever your God is for being in this world, to be a compassionate, loving human being. And really, to do that, it starts with me. It starts with me being more comfortable with myself, being more aware with myself. And like you said, once we do that work, we start that work, because it's a lifelong journey.
Mm-hmm.
Once we start that work, it's a lot easier to be less judgmental of other people. The things that used to be like, oh my God, it's like, you go, girl. Shit, okay. Hey.
Let me get like you.
It's like, live your life, girl. It's, so let me screenshot that, because one day I might have a nerve. It's all
Literally.
good. So, how can people support and collaborate with Define and Empower?
Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at define&empower.co. If you would like to have us come to your workplace or your university, you can DM us or drop us like a message on our website, which is define&empower.com. We also do consulting work for brands. So if you wanted to bring in like a Black feminist perspective, you could have us come in and do consulting or research. You can also donate to our PayPal at define&empower.co as well if you'd like to support us that way. And we're always looking for new writers for the blog, audio editors, video editors, folks like that. Anyone who wants to even get involved and maybe teach a class with us can also reach out to us as well via our website or our email, which is amanda@define&empower.com.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to leave the audience with before we say bye bye?
Hmm. Yeah, just that loving yourself will make the world a lot better of a place. And how do you incorporate that act of self love into every aspect of your life, maybe with your job, your family, your community, and let that be your guiding motivation?
I love it. Thank you. Everyone, I've been
Thank
chatting with
you.
Miss Amanda Bennett. I will have all of her information in the description box for the podcast, apps, and on YouTube, and at SheConfidential.com. So thank you, Amanda. Thank you, audience. I'm Charlene Ketchum, and this is She Confidential. Until next time.